Girls.
Yes, Ginger.
The Ginger, yes. And so that the Washington Post has put together a list of possible names of people who could replace her. And actually, you're one of them, right here.
What are the
Paglia, they call you Snarly Spice.
Oh, great.
What do you think about being called
that.
Snarly?
I think it's a very good role model for women. I think women should be as nasty as possible.
Why should they be nasty as
Because
possible?
women have been, you know, nodding and smiling and giving men support from behind the scenes for years. It's about time women take stage.
Now, they also named some other people. Martha Stewart. They call her Really Scary Spice. Vernon Jordan. Aiken Gump, Strauss, Hauer, Feld, and Spice. Courtney Love, Smack and Spice. And Bob Hope, Old Spice, which is one that keeps going. Now, also in USA Today, there is a more serious story, but about the same thing. A woman, Diane McWhorter, who's a writer in New York, talks about the whole issue of the Spice Girls and her young daughter. She says that the band is a triumph of commerce over art, is not noteworthy in the culture that has made a cardinal virtue of celebrity. What is remarkable and little remarked upon is that, like the Beatles, the Spice Girls have managed to make a significant political mark on a generation of fans. The band's true appeal to young girls is the ideology sweetly summed up in its slogan, Girl Power.
Yes, I think they have been a very positive influence on young kids, 12, 13. I mean, the kind of music they made was fairly superficial. But like Madonna, I mean, Madonna, they're kind of a cleaned up version of Madonna. Madonna showed young girls how to be sexy and at the same time assertive. I think, you know, the influence of the Spice Girls will, even if this band fades, it'll go on for another generation.
So are you in the line? Has anybody contacted you about this possibility?
No, you know, just last night I was at the National Press Club, which is why I'm in Washington. I gave a speech on women in leadership, and I used the example of the Spice Girls, the group falling apart as an example of the failure of women's knowledge of teamwork, or the way that men are able to hold together from their little league era when they're very young. I think that the inability of girl groups to hang together for long enough shows a problem we've got to face, that for women to really break through the glass ceiling, they've got to learn how to be a member of a team in the workplace or in Congress.
Do you see women out there who are successfully being members of team and therefore successfully getting their point out?
Well, I think Title IX, even when Title IX has been used excessively, causing so many men's teams to be disbanded, I think that Title IX, over the long run, is going to help women to learn how to function in teams, because there's a way of subordinating your ego, sort of being competitive in the arena, and then a kind of hail fellow well-meant backslapping thing that men have outside the office, okay, which glues the glue that holds together so much of the corporate network in the world. And it's something that I think we've got to start thinking about for girls from the high school level on. This kind of practical, vocational sort of problem solving, how to interact in a group and not just become a diva like this one Spice Girl immediately. Well, I'm too big for this. I don't have to take this anymore. The great men's groups in rock have held together over time, over decades, even when they fought with each other, even when they had fisticuffs with each other. I think we have to really examine this if women expect to rise in the world. And I want a woman in the White House within, I hope, within a decade.
Who is it?
I don't know. I don't know who it's going to be. But it's a scandal. It's a scandal that this country, where women are the freest in history, we still have not elected a woman to either vice president or president.
What's the story? One story that you've brought with you this morning that you said to yourself, if I don't get to anything else, we've got to talk about this. What is it?
Bilingual education. I'm thrilled that finally, the people of California have woken up to the reality. I have been hammering on this theme since I came on the scene in 1990. I'm a member of an immigrant family. My mother was born in Italy, came here at the age of 6 in the 1930s, and she has the same position that I do on this question. All 4 of my grandparents were born in Italy. Thank God there was no atrocity like bilingual education when they came here. No one said to them, "Oh, you poor Italian immigrant, you want to preserve your language, your heritage, and so we're just going to keep you in this little ghetto of your own language." Well, it's up to the family to preserve the language of the individual immigrant. Okay? It's up to them to preserve. It's not up to the schools to do it. English is a very difficult language. It's now the lingua franca of the world, in the way that French used to be, the language of business and diplomacy. People don't realize how difficult it is. The kids will pick it up. They'll pick it up from what? From the newspapers? Do you know there's a complexity of English spelling, of diction. It's going to harm a Hispanic youth, okay, moving along up the career track into being an attorney in court, there are very subtle uses of language in English. You have got to be immersed in English from the start to here. Now, my parents made a decision that they would not speak Italian even in the home for me. I was an only child for 14 years. And the reason I'm able to write best-selling books that have gone around the world, the reason I have mastered English is because my parents, thank God, knew that the mastery of English was a door to the world for immigrant youth. So I'm delighted that finally so many Latino parents have realized how their kids have been held back by this kind of boondoggle. It's a boondoggle.
Phone lines are open. If you would like to talk to Camille Paglia this morning, you'll see the phone numbers at the bottom of your screen. You can also email us or fax us if you would like to do it in that way, and we'll start taking your calls in just a few minutes. You write for Slate.
Certainly not. I write for Salon.
I'm sorry, excuse me, for Salon.
No, Slate.
I misspoke. Excuse me. That's the other. That is the competitor.
Yes, that's our competitor.
This is what it looks like. What do you write for them?
Well, I write a column that's a kind of advice column, in which people write email anything from politics to sex to pop. I try to show the full range of cultural interests that are going on in the world today. This magazine is based in San Francisco. David Talbot, the editor-in-chief, used to be with the San Francisco Examiner. They were early supporters of my ideas, and I think that these men are visionaries. And that Salon, which is way above Slate in any kind of quality, Salon, its reach around the world, the kind of messages we get from Australia or everywhere from South Africa to Norway to Chile, it's absolutely fantastic. One can put something on the internet at 10 o'clock at night, and the next, within hours, is being read in London. I think it's a marvelous tool, and I don't think people realize the degree to which the young people are on the internet. I don't think even the major media realizes the extent to which their children in the universities in this country are on hours and hours and hours. Some new international culture is being formed via the internet, which I have great hopes for in terms of international understanding and possibly world peace.
Camille Paglia has a new book out. We'll be talking about it in this 2 hours that she will be with us this morning. Columbia, Maryland, you're first up on the liberal line joining us. Good morning.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Paglia, I've listened to you frequently and enjoyed a lot of what you said, although I don't always agree. Mm-hmm. But as a lifelong liberal, I have the following question. I supported affirmative action for many years. I see where it's a problem, even where I worked and across the country. And perhaps we have to back off. But we need an affirmative action program. I'm sure you'll agree. What mechanism can we use other than the quota system to improve affirmative action programs?
Well, I personally feel that affirmative action was a noble idea that was applied in a very brutal and stupid fashion. I think it has ended up benefiting not the original group for which it was intended, African Americans, but white middle-class women who are not in need of this help. I have seen, in my view, the way that affirmative action has distorted the humanities education in the elite schools across this country. There are an enormous number of extremely mediocre women who have been elevated to the top ranks. I'm talking about the Ivy League. I'm talking about it anywhere from Harvard to Duke to Princeton to Berkeley. I think that affirmative action has been a part of the general debasement of intellectual and scholarly standards in the universities. Now, I don't agree at all with the quota tendency of affirmative action. No matter what people say, it has been a quota system. I think what we needed to do was to look at public school education. I want to return to basics. That's the way to help African American youth make their way in the world, to give them the basic skills. But at the same time, as affirmative action came along, as this clumsy government tool, we had a complete abandonment of the inner city schools, a sense that, well, there's no way to really have order. We can't possibly harm people's self-esteem by keeping them back a grade if they haven't mastered basic skills. And so there has been, people have to have guns to protect themselves in the schools right now. Teachers have lost control of the classroom. There's an administrative bureaucracy that has drained funds and morale from teachers in the classroom. The kind of public school education that I got and that my parents got coming over, my entire immigrant family got, it's quite gone now. I think that's the real affirmative action, to begin at the foundation and not try to play catch-up ball at the top.
Moderate line, Arlington, Texas, next.
Yes, hello, I'm on the line.
You're on, sir.
Camille's one of my heroes, even though I'm a man. Because of her views in most things, I think that she thinks out things completely and absolutely and gives a real honest opinion. But I have one question about the magazine you work for. And I've heard that was created primarily to support Bill Clinton. And, you don't fit that mold. And I haven't read Salon magazine, but I've heard a lot of raps that it's primarily created for backup support for Clinton.
Well, actually, that is a libel that has been put out there very recently because of certain scoops that Salon got about all kinds, some weird financial payoffs that might have been allegedly involving David Hale, one of the primary witnesses in the Starr investigation of President Clinton back in Little Rock. I assure you, Salon is not in no way a shell for the Clinton White House. These are brilliant journalists whose roots are, again, in the San Francisco Examiner, and we've been happily going along for 2 years, publishing an enormously wide range of political and artistic and pop opinion. It's only now that the Salon has broken into the news because of this one area of its expose. But David Horowitz, a very prominent conservative commentator who was once a radical in the 1960s, is a columnist along with me. Although I am a Clinton Democrat originally and voted for Clinton, my opinion of what has been going on in the White House has been blistering, and I have certainly not spared this administration. So that is just a false rap, I would say.
Gaithersburg, Maryland, you're next. Good morning, Gaithersburg.
Good morning, Camille. I wanted you to talk about the mainstream feminists losing their voice when it comes to Bill Clinton. And I also wanted to say I love you and I love your column. And
thank you.
The brand of feminism needs to come to the forefront.
Thank you very much. Oh, well, I have just been in hog heaven as I have been watching the feminist establishment deconstruct in the past few months. It has been wonderful. Because you see, when I finally burst on the scene after being silenced for so long, unable to be published in 1990, I began hammering the major media with the phrase feminist establishment. I have hammered and hammered that, and I'm delighted that finally the media has woken up and seen what I was talking about. That the problems were not with feminism. They have never been with feminism. They have been with a feminist establishment, an insular coterie, a Politburo, a bunch of people, socialites who cling together and who were in what I believe was corrupt collusion with the hierarchy of the Democratic Party, my own party. I have been delighted with the disarray in the leading feminist ranks, but again, it is quite wrong to say that something has gone wrong with feminism. Feminism is alive and well.
You said you were silenced.
Yes.
When and how?
My gosh, by the time I was able to get published, I was 43 years old. I had a book that was Sexual Personae, the book that finally Yale University Press took a chance on, a 700-page book. That had been completed 9 years before. The parts of that book as they were being written throughout the 1970s, I could not get them published. I could not get hired because anywhere in a major research university, and that continues today, I am completely ostracized by the major research universities in this country. It is an absolute scandal for a person with a 700-page book on the whole history of the arts from Yale. If I'm invited to speak at a campus, it is by the students or by a small cadre of dissident faculty. You have situations where you might have the people, when I went to, for example, to give a lecture at Wellesley College, members of the English department put onto the email of that college to the students, don't go to hear her speak. I'm like one of the most well-known writers, women writers in America right now, and at Wellesley College, the faculty would try to stop the students from coming to hear me speak. You cannot believe how bad it is. No one realizes how bad it is in the major schools in this country. Okay? And the media has been ignoring it because I believe that they've been trying to protect the value of the degrees of their children, which they are paying $30,000 a year for. Okay? They don't want to hear this. This is the bad news, that there has been an absolute disastrous decline in the teaching of the humanities and of history as well in many of the elite schools.
Another story you're reading this morning.
Okay, well, the Religious Freedom Bill interests me. I'm not sure I know all of the intricacies of it, but I think that, and I'm certainly not, I'm not a conservative at all. However, I am an atheist, but I believe very strongly that religion needs to be honored much more in education and in the world, because certainly the kind of philosophy that's coming out of the schools, which is a kind of nihilistic post-structuralism, which believes there is no truth, there is no meaning in existence, that nature doesn't exist, history doesn't exist. I think that our kids at the elite schools, who are going to be the future leaders of the professions in politics and in law and so on, that they have nothing. There's a nothingness at the heart part of American culture when parents haven't given any kind of spiritual guidance. There is no religion even to rebel against in the home, and then they go to university and are taught to question everything and to adopt a pose of fashionable chic irony, okay, about life. It's a disaster. So in general, I support this idea that there should be a moment in the school day which some people may use for silent prayer, others may use for meditation. I think that there's nothing wrong with that, to remind people that the universe is much bigger than the individual self.
But you were an atheist.
I am an atheist, but I respect religion enormously. I come out of a very vibrant Italian Catholic heritage. I believe the great religions of the world contain an enormous amount of truth about the meaning of the universe. In fact, in many of my proposals for educational reform, I proposed that world religions be at the heart of a true multicultural and global core curriculum. Now, that idea is where you hear it elsewhere. Now people are repeating it, but that idea, when I put it forward in 1990, was considered extremely shocking. What? You're mentioning religion? Everyone knows that religion is nothing but oppression and bigotry, okay? That is ridiculous. It's absurd. And the anti-Catholic kinds of bias that you see everywhere in the major media and in popular culture and everywhere, I think it is abhorrent. It is reprehensible on the part of gay activists or wherever you hear that anti-Catholic, that is another form of bigotry that the major media is usually rather silent about.
Congressman Istuk, who is right here in USA Today this morning, will be with us in about 45 minutes or so, actually 35 minutes, to talk about this prayer amendment that's up before the House today. Orlando, Florida, you're next with Camille Paglia.
Camille, I would suggest that you sort of slow down your voice. You speak so quickly.
Because I'm a teacher. I have to wake up the class at 8:30.
Let somebody else get for saying. It's just very difficult to even listen to you. You're very abrasive.
Well, turn the TV off, madam.
Wait. You're also very, very catty. I remember when you criticized Hillary for taking too much time off from her duties when her father died. Now, some of us had wonderful relationships with our fathers, and when they died, it was devastating. You are a cat, and you represent
yes, I am.
the worst in femininity. Thank you, and slow down. Listening to you is just very difficult.
Well, I'm sorry to say that that kind of over-emotional reaction from a woman does not do women any service. Her using the word catty about a woman intellectual shows what's wrong with women right now. Okay, I think that a person who uses such a word is very catty herself. And I think that treating Hillary Clinton as if she is beyond criticism, when she had put herself forward as the head of massive health care reform in this country, and then 2 weeks later suddenly was off tending to her private business as if she had a private life in the way that men who are in public do not. I think that Hillary Clinton has not done the feminist movement any kind of service. She began as a kind of carrying the banner of contemporary feminism. She is an exact age mate of mine, but I think that Hillary, after she leaves the White House, is going to recover herself after she gets out from the shadow of her husband. I think that she will go around the world and be a very good representative of an enlightened kind of Western feminism and speak for the need for women's education in the world. So I think the best of Hillary may be ahead.
This email from Newport, Rhode Island: I'm still a strong supporter of the president. I especially respect Mrs. Clinton and have heard you speak positively of them in the past. Has your opinion of them changed?
Well, I am a Clinton Democrat. I believe very strongly in Clinton's original mission to heal up the great schism between liberalism and conservatism in this country. I felt that these are false polarities that we just need to get rid of them for the 21st century. I've been very disappointed with the behavior of the Clintons. I think that even though Bill is essentially a populist at heart, coming from Little Rock, that they surrounded themselves with a kind of arrogant clique of Yale Law School graduates, and I know that very well, having gone to the Yale graduate school at the same time they did. They have the attitude that somehow by mere IQ alone that the world can be saved. That's kind of brittleness and an insularity that I think, this is a process that happened to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party used to be the party of working class people. My grandfather worked in a shoe factory, and the guy in the shoe factory was a Franklin Roosevelt Democrat, and slowly over time, the Democratic Party has lost its base as it did what the Clintons have done, just hung around with the powers that be, a kind of very arrogant, white, upper-middle-class professional clique.
Gainesville, Florida, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a thrill to speak to Ms. Paglia this morning. I'm a big fan of yours.
Thanks.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I call the bilingual establishment, because I think that there is such a thing, and they're very involved in ethnic politics. I myself, I was born in Cuba, and my family came to this country when I was 1 month old. I learned to speak Spanish in the home. I did not speak a word of English, and I was sent to kindergarten without speaking English, and the teacher sent me home and told my mother, well, at this time kindergarten was not mandatory, and they said she has to return for first grade. Perhaps she can speak English a little better. And in that 1 year, I picked up English very well. And I believe that I flourished as a student. I'm now a PhD candidate at a major research university. And this is just something that I think that is so important, and people miss the mark a lot. But, about the changeover, how immersion is so important. And secondly, I feel that I have a very good identity. My family, I agree with you, it's not the government's mission to preserve the identity of all ethnic backgrounds of children. But particularly with Hispanics, I believe there is a very large establishment there. I don't know if it has something to do with teachers' unions or perhaps preserving an identity for a democratic base. As you mentioned before, the democratic base is dissolving. But I have a suggestion for bilingual teachers. I wanted to see what you thought about this. In California, since bilingual education is going to be going away pretty soon, how would you feel about the teachers instead teaching all students a second language? That's something I think this country has really missed the mark on, whereas in Europe and Asia, most students speak 2, maybe even 3 languages.
Florida, thanks.
Oh, I so agree with that. That is one thing we desperately need in education. Is the kids should be taught languages early on. In fact, I think that's an excellent way to train the mind. You become more aware of your own language by studying foreign languages. I was trained in Latin in high school, and so many of the Latin programs have been abandoned. My whole sense of the etymology of words and how to structure sentences comes so much from Latin. I think we really need to do this. The provincialism, the parochialism of American culture. There's also an area where the major media can help. My mother has expressed years ago her irritation every time the Pope opens his mouth speaking in a foreign language from the balcony of St. Peter's. All of a sudden you get another voice coming in, the voice of the announcer. Heaven forbid we should ever hear someone speaking a foreign language. My mother calls it the Pope said "ok." The Pope goes "ok" like that, and then is immediately cut off, terminated. I think that if someone is speaking in a foreign language, there should be subtitles on screen or something like that. It is really terrible what we're doing to our young people, making them feel like America somehow as if it's like a planet moving around the solar system, independent from all the other cultures and languages of the world.
Van Buren, Arkansas, on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Good morning. I wanted to compliment Miss Paglia and on the article that she wrote about Monica Lewinsky being a little pudgy. It was good to see some fleshy women coming to the forefront. It was a wonderful, wonderful piece. But I have a couple of questions. She reminds me of my best friend of 30 years who has remained pretty snarly, and I was pretty snarly, and I want to ask the question. My best friend has never married in the 30 years and had children, and I think that marrying and having children took away quite a bit of my snarliness through the years. But then I've gotten it back recently. So I wondered what she thought about this.
about whether motherhood makes you become less snarly? I don't know. I think so. I think motherhood definitely, certainly takes the edges off egotism. How often I have seen famous actresses after they become pregnant suddenly being interviewed on Entertainment Tonight and saying, almost as if they've become Stepford wives in certain ways, they go, I now realize I'm not important, my child is important, I'm concerned about the future. I think there is something in the biological transformation of pregnancy and childbirth that does put one's own vocational interests sort of on the shelf as you look forward toward posterity. I think it gives women a kind of historical perspective through pregnancy.
For those who didn't read it, what did you write about Monica Lewinsky being pudgy?
Oh, well, a number of things. Oh, first of all, her kind of her full fleshy Rubensian quality, I think, is a positive at a period where we're a little bit too concerned about about thinness. So many of the styles in the magazines are indeed geared to a kind of Carolyn Bessette, thin as a rail kind of physique. I think it's about time that the stores indeed are starting to think more clearly about the need to have more full-figured fashions. I think it's part of a movement. But in general, though, women seem to be at war with their own bodies. Estrogen, the female hormone, fat deposits on all the curvy places that heterosexual men esteem women for. And so in a culture where the very thin look is kind of boyish, athletic look is idealized, you have women involved in, for all of their lives, 40 years of their lives, involved in what is essentially a battle with nature.
I want to ask you then about the front page story in the Washington Post this morning, where the federal government is expected to announce soon that there's plans to change its definition of what is a healthy weight. It's a controversial move that's going to change the classification of an estimated 29 million Americans who are now considered normal weight, and they will be redefined as overweight.
So what? So the cutoff point is being lowered.
The cutoff point will be lowered, but it's also a different kind of. They do a statistical analysis where they look at different factors. But yeah, basically, here's the chart right here. If people of these weights were considered healthy by federal degree, they will now be overweight. For instance, a 5'2" person at 136 pounds will be considered overweight now.
I'm coming out of Italian culture where, an extra weight is considered healthy. And I think that there's something maybe wrong with this. I'm a little suspicious. I teach a course called Women and Sex Roles at the University of the Arts, and one of the main themes of this course is to trace the oscillating vision of woman through history, from the early, very voluptuous great goddess statuettes where the large breasts and buttocks were a symbol of affluence and the fertility of nature, to the thinner, almost anorectic look of the periods in which actually women take a place in society. It's a theme that goes back and forth. We just compare the ideal woman of the 1890s, for example, with her overflowing bosom and her accentuated hips. You would have a bustle on the back of the dress, a very large, voluminous skirts, making her look like a kind of queen bee. Compare that to the 1920s, the flapper look. After World War I, there's a kind of androgynous look where the breasts were flattened and so on. And so if you happen to be lucky enough to have your body conform to the prevailing stereotype, you're very popular. 10 years later, you could have lost the sweepstakes of popularity. So it's not something, I don't believe it's something that's being imposed by men. I don't think it's like a sexist conspiracy to give women low self-esteem or anything like that. I believe it has to do with whether people are living in an agricultural time where survival is necessary. Therefore, the plump woman is a sign of prosperity and health, or you're in a time when women are expected to be more like men and to make their way in the world by brain and by their talents, their vocational talents. So we're in a period right now, unfortunately, in which the proper look is a bit too thin for my taste.
Alexandria, Virginia, conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, may I say thank you for C-SPAN. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, and what a joy it is to talk to you, Camille. I certainly don't agree with you politically on a lot of issues, but you exude such an honesty about your opinion that it's a pleasure to listen to you whenever I can on C-SPAN.
Thank you.
I'd like your opinion on two things, if I may. We've raised 7 daughters, and they all went to a private all-girls school. And my feeling is that it's because of that they have become such strong, independent women. I think they were active in sports and things like that. And I for years I've been saying what you said about women not being able to be a team player, and it's because they never had that opportunity. I'd like your opinion on that, and the fact that I find it very difficult to discuss political issues with women because they seem to take every issue very personally. Mm-hmm. And you seem to be able to discuss any issue at all and not have that personal, emotional spin on it.
Right. Yes, I think that's a terrible problem. The women do over-personalize political and intellectual issues. But what you said about the all-girl education, my sister went to Smith College, for example, and there are positives and negatives to any such experience. Obviously, being separate from men as you're being trained is unnatural because women will have to interact with men in the workplace. On the other hand, being with all girls for a while, I think does help to strengthen women's ability to speak and to present themselves. I don't agree agree with there's another one of these boondoggle industries out there talking about the girls' low self-esteem in early adolescence, and the way that teachers discriminate against girls in the classroom and pay more attention to boys. That is such a bunch of malarkey. Wherever you hear that, it's absolute nonsense. The real fact of the matter is, there's the missing term in all these discussions is that young girls suddenly experience their first periods. All right, they suddenly undergo the menstrual process, an enormous thing that happens to them from inside their bodies, and all of a sudden they become quieter and more reflective. It's an enormous and profound experience. I think there's an embarrassment factor that women don't want to embarrass themselves. I can see it as a teacher of 27 years in the classroom, that you can see the girls who are very excellent students and they're very attentive. They're usually far better than the boys. There's the rare boy that's as good as the girls. But I can see in their eyes, don't embarrass me. Don't call me. Don't let me make a fool of myself. Whereas the boys don't care. All right, the boys are immature. They're mad egotists. They don't care if they make a fool of themselves. They just want to express themselves. Right. So that's what I see is that this is why the analysts of self-esteem are so totally wrong. When the teachers are paying more attention to the boys, is to say, shut up, put your feet down. You're being a fool, or that sort of thing. And the boys love it. They love attention for its own sake. So I do think that all girls' schools, in fact, all boys' schools in high school as well, by removing the sexual attraction issue, okay, from the dynamic, I think it does allow both sexes to develop their vocational skills.
Tucson, Arizona, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Hi, Ms. Paglia. It's very nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Are you aware of the following that you have among gay people? You know, we have gay friends in Mexico even, and thanks to the web, we've been able to share your writings and stuff. And the other part of my question is, are you aware that you're always questioning establishment, even gay establishment? And are you doing that on purpose?
Oh, yes, I am. Okay. Well, I'm an open lesbian of bisexual experience, and I have been in open warfare with the gay activist establishment in this country. I have to say, I have yet to meet a gay activist that I would trust, across the street with my wallet. I think that they are some of the most vicious, dishonest people I have ever encountered in my life. They have eyes that are cold, absolutely cold. It's impossible to have any kinds of dialogue with them. Everywhere I've gone to try to open up any kind of discussion with them, it has not succeeded. And at this point in America, thank heavens, they've lost the kind of cachet that they once had. The major media, however, is still very much manipulated from behind the scenes, I think, by gay activist pressure. I'm not happy with it. There are whole issues, for example, about the origins of homosexuality that are off, that are verboten. No one can dare to come near them. There's only one way of looking at homosexuality in terms of oppressors and victims. This kind of sentimental scenario of history that gay people have been imprisoned throughout history, and now finally they're finding their true place, and it's up to everyone to let. Meanwhile, there are no questions being asked about the relationship of homosexuality to the family unit, to all kinds of cultural pressures that are going on. I mean, I see I'm obviously entirely 100% in favor of gay rights. I'm a libertarian. I believe the government has no right to tell you what you do in your private life or in your bedroom. The government power stops, okay, at your own private door. On the other hand, I believe that the kind of strident claims that homosexuality is equal to heterosexuality, and that you're born gay, and that it's not a choice or anything like that, and that people who are attempting to help other gay men, let's say, to be able to relate heterosexually to a woman, that such things are homophobic and that they have to be stopped, and there's all kinds of harassment of therapy groups where perfectly voluntary discussions are going on the part of gay people who feel that their lifestyle is no longer as satisfying as they would want it to be. So I try to just try to break through into every possible closed area of discourse. Yes, and I am aware of the international fans that I have in the Latin American world, because my ideas, for example, are exactly like those of Brazil. I mean, my attitudes toward life are very much Mediterranean, and there's a lot of Mediterranean, of course, immigration into Brazil. So I think I'm more understood, perhaps, outside the borders of the United States.
Tom River, New Jersey, on the Liberal line. Good morning.
Yes, Ms. Paglia, you were speaking about models and how thin they are. You seem to be cast in that role that you're so thin yourself. I'm wondering if you get that way by your constant talking, your constant way of talking, and your disposition, and you're so volatile. But you ever rest? Ever rest?
Yes, unfortunately, I do need sleep. I'm constantly battling the bulge. I adore eating. I may appear thin, but it's a constant battle. Being Italian, I eat enormous quantities of food. So I'm not naturally thin. No, my father certainly was. But on the other hand, even though I'm criticizing the tendency of models to be a little bit too thin in the magazines right now, I am a great supporter of the fashion industry and of the fashion magazines. And I think one of the services I have done in feminism in the 1990s was to get people off that ridiculous rhetoric that the fashion magazines are there to give women low self-esteem and so on. I see the fashion magazines, many of which have gay artists operating in photography, in makeup, in costume, and so on. I see the fashion magazines as artworks for the masses, and most people, most ordinary housewives, like to leaf through fashion magazines. They don't get low self-esteem from doing it. They love to simply glory in the beauty and the color of these magnificent pictorials, which are available for $3.95 on the newsstand. So I don't want to seem to be part of the feminist group that's constantly demeaning fashion magazines.
Your 3 books. Sexual Persona, 1990. What was that about again?
Well, Sexual Persona is an account of the whole history of images of sexuality from cave art through ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, to the Renaissance, down to the 19th century, in which I deal with a lot of major authors, down to the 1900s. In the second volume of Sexual Persona is on popular culture. I'm currently revising that.
And Sex, Art, and American Culture, 1992.
This was a collection of my essays with a number of other new essays I wrote on the subjects of sex and art and culture.
1994, Vamps and Tramps.
And again, more of my collected essays and all kinds of other things, cartoons that have been done about me and so on. And then
which one sold the best?
Well, Sexual Persona is the best-selling work of literary criticism of the 1990s. You never know from the attitude of the Ivy League. It was a breakout book. That is, it was simply a book published by a university press without any kind of publicity. My picture wasn't on it. I was unknown. And for some mysterious reason, the book kept selling and selling and selling and has gone around the world in many languages. And it shows that people are very hungry right now for looking at literature and art in terms of appreciation and respect and honor, and not trashing literature and art in the way that is taught you in the Ivy League and all the schools, the elite schools right now, and questioning, going with a red pen through the great works and going, racism, sexism, homophobia, like that. I'm Italian, and I was trained to honor the artist and to honor great art. I believe art contains the whole history of humanity, and so I think people were eager for that, written in plain English, and people wrote to me. General readers are writing to me about, this is the best education I have had since I've gone to the library and taken so many books out. You stimulate the desire to read and to study. So I mean, I feel that I've made a connection with the general audience, which is indeed thirsty for the history of art. In fact, that leads us into one of the other things I chose this morning, which is this magnificent full-page ad in the New York Times for a new exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Edward Burne-Jones, one of my favorite painters. There are certain illustrations from him in my book, Sexual Persona. Look at that magnificent full-page ad. Now, there you have it. The people, whenever a major exhibition is offered now on Cézanne or any major artist, people utterly flock, right? This is the kind of education that they're no longer getting in the universities. Right? The universities are into, the artist doesn't really exist. Art is merely a tool of a political agenda. But here we have the museums now offering themselves as shrines of culture. I absolutely support it. I think this full-color ad coming at one in the black and white New York Times is just magnificent. I believe that art is the record, again, of the highest impulses in humanity. If we are going to represent ourselves to distant civilizations around the galaxies, if they exist, we will show ourselves by our art. Okay? And so I feel that the attitude of the major academic establishment toward art is utterly reprehensible, utterly reprehensible. All right? It is shameful, okay? The kind of skepticism, okay, and a kind of a pose of superiority that our best students are being tutored in.
We'll talk about your new book after this call from Alpharetta?
Alpharetta, Georgia.
Alpharetta, Georgia. Where is that?
It's in New Gingrich District, north of Atlanta.
Thanks for joining us on the Conservative Line. You're on the air.
Actually, that's the only line I could get in on. I am a libertarian like you, Miss Paglia. I'm surprised. I was, first of all, let me say God bless you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm quite disappointed with the Republican Party, but I wanted to talk about three women real quickly, if I could, in my life. First one is my wife. She comes from South Korea. I'm 33 years old right now. She's 30. She came over here, didn't speak a word of English, and the only reason she wasn't valedictorian of her high school class, and she came over here in sophomore year, is because she wasn't here long enough. Okay, she learned it on her own watching Sesame Street. Second woman I'd like to talk about is my mother. My mother worked all the time, and she raised 4 kids. Okay, she still works to this day. She makes more money than any of her kids to this day. Okay, so I don't understand a lot of the uproar about women working, having to go into the work. And the other woman I like to talk about is my sister, who's probably the toughest woman I've ever known. I mean, she's divorced now, is raising 2 kids, but I never once heard her cry and say, "Oh, mighty federal government, help me." And I just think you're a breath of fresh air, and I had a different opinion of you, but I'm glad to see you this morning.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I think the attitude of my family coming over from Italy and working extremely hard. Italians have the attitude about labor, working. My grandfather worked all day long at the shoe factory. My grandmothers were constantly working in the home, and there is a kind of ethic of labor, of work, and not looking for handouts. On the other hand, the Endicott Johnson shoe factory was run in a very enlightened way by the man who founded it, and he provided health care to his workers, and boxcars of citrus fruit would arrive from his Florida home every winter for the people. He allowed he had plans to allow the leather workers to build homes of their own, which my grandfather was able to do. So I think there's a great deal of room for enlightened kind of capitalism. I'm a capitalist. I believe very strongly that the Industrial Revolution has allowed women to emerge strongly into independent, self-sufficient economic life in the modern world. I don't see capitalism as the enemy. On the other hand, I do think we need to have to start teaching ethics to our aspiring businessmen, so that they that they will have a feeling for their workers, which certainly is not part of the present two-tiered system of lavish perks at the top and rather a low pay scale at the bottom.
America's first look at the cover of your new book. What is it?
The Birds. Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, one of his great classic films. The British Film Institute asked me to write on a film. I chose this one, and it will be out next month in London. It is from beginning to end of this film, I tried to explain every single detail of its production and of it's an interpretation and commentary of the performances and so on.
Why this one? Why this movie?
This movie is about nature. It's about the enormous power of nature and that's another one of the subjects which is denied in the elite schools right now. Nature doesn't exist to them. We're born tabula rasa, we're born blank slates, we become male and female later. Nature is something that's other. I think that nature is an overwhelming force. That's my religion. It's my religion, my sense of the vastness of the universe. Geology is my favorite science. The ferocity of the birds coming in, it reflects the fact that we still have not solved the mystery of man's place in the universe.
Paris, Texas, you're next on the Moderate Line. Good morning.
Good morning. Camille, I'm a huge fan. I'm so excited to talk to you this
Thank you.
I love Sexual Personae. It really illuminated a lot for me ever since I've read it.
Thank you very much.
I was excited to hear that you consider yourself a libertarian, and I wondered if you have ever considered any kind of political office. I think you would be such a wonderful candidate to give legitimacy to libertarianism.
Well, the Libertarian Party has now and then written to me and asked me if I would be interested in possibly being their presidential candidate. I am not material, I'm afraid, for politics. I'm an intellectual. I'm a teacher. I'm used to, my entire manner comes from 27 years of managing kids in the classroom and so on. You need voices like mine outside the system, I think. We're just kind of whistleblowers, and we're there just to make a lot of trouble. I think that a politician needs far greater diplomatic skills than I have. I'm afraid I don't suffer fools gladly. And you have to just have a kind of an equanimity of temper that I think I lack. But I do think that aspiring women politicians need to learn.
You mentioned you went to Yale.
Well, I went to the State University of New York, Binghamton, for my undergraduate degree. I had a superb education in this public school. And then I went to Yale University for my PhD, and I was there at the same time as the Clintons were across the street at the law school.
Both did English.
In English was my PhD. Yes, that's correct. But my general interest is in the history of the arts and culture.
You grew up in Endicott, New York.
I was born in Endicott, New York. That's right. And then we moved to a small town called Oxford and lived on a farm for a bit. And then we were in Syracuse. My father was first a high school teacher and then a college teacher. And so I'm a product of the snow belt. And I think that women who grow up in the snow belt, whether we're talking about Wisconsin or upstate New York, tend to have a kind of feisty, forthright manner because we're so used to dealing with the elements.
When you were young, who was the person that you looked to as someone who inspired you or was your role model?
Well, early on, my father taught me early on to think for myself. I was saying at the National Press Club last night that my father taught me how to put up my hands and to fight like a boy, essentially when I was young, not to allow myself to be pushed around on the street, to be ready to defend myself. And my father wanted me to chart an independent path. Okay, my mother wanted me to have an eye for social proprieties too. So I think I had a good balance in the way I was raised. I have very powerful personalities in my Italian background, very powerful women and powerful men. So I come from this tradition of outspoken people, charismatic men, and powerful women, and therefore I'm very impatient with the kinds of mealy mouth, the nerdiness that I see among the students when I go to the elite schools. I mean, all of the feminist rhetoric that the women are being taught in the elite schools is certainly not making them as powerful as my grandmother was, for example. My grandmother had a kind of majesty and awesome power that I don't see anywhere in these little whiny little girls that are being produced by contemporary feminism.
Are your parents still alive?
Well, my father died in the early 1990s, and my mother still lives in Syracuse.
What does she think of your success?
Well, my sister said to my mother at one point, she said, just imagine how Mick Jagger's mother must have felt. Well, my mother is not crazy about publicity, but I think that she agrees with a lot of my positions, obviously, like about bilingual education and so on. So I think I'm carrying the Italian-American flag. Certainly not. We've had Italian-Americans a lot in the entertainment industry, like Frank Sinatra and so on, but really not that many. There's Gay Talese and so on, who have risen in the world of scholarship or letters, and especially not Italian-American women. So I'm glad to be pushing forward there.
Washington, D.C. on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Chris Ray. I just want to commend you for a wonderful job you're doing. I think you're a pioneer for women around the world. I hope that you keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Springfield, Virginia, You're next. Good morning, Springfield.
Good morning. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Camille, my name is Ralph. I'm an Italian-American, and you're my favorite liberal. I love your column. I read Salon on the Internet. Are you familiar with the graduation speech? It was made by the New York Times city editor, I believe it was, to Barnard College?
No.
Apparently, the article I read, it was sort of a slip of the tongue is the way they pitched it, but she talked about how she gave up family to devote full time to her career. And the tenor of the article was that this is what men do all the time. They devote 100% of their time if they want to get to the top of their career. And I'd like to get your comments. I'll hang up now and put the television back on so I can devote full attention to you.
Thank you. Well, it really is true that over time that men have given an enormous amount of their lives to providing a livelihood for their families. I think that is one of the raw deals that men have gotten in feminist rhetoric of the last 25 years. I think that that there's Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power, talks about this. The idea that somehow men are just in it for themselves, working those very, very long days, and it's cost them emotionally at home, being so distant from the family unit. I certainly have the example in Italian-American culture is that men being extremely devoted to family life. I didn't have the experience of any negligent or abusive men in my whole family history. So I feel that that kind of rhetoric. I'm not sure which figure from the New York Times you're talking about here, but there's an awful lot, let's say, of garbage that comes out of the hierarchy of the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times used to be a magnificent newspaper in the 1970s, and one can scarcely believe what one reads in it half the time these days. Even though I'm writing for it myself, I'm very discouraged by the quality of journalism and the quality of thinking of most of the northeastern newspapers.
Camille Paglia will be rejoining us in about 15 minutes, and we will continue to go through some of the papers, the story that she's written. We're going to give you a break, however. You can get a cup of coffee and read some of the papers out in our green room. In the meantime, we're going to talk to Congressman Istuk from Oklahoma, who is joining us. Congressman Istuk is the leader of the movement and the writer of the amendment that will be up on the House floor this morning. Good morning, Congressman.
Well, good morning.
I want to ask you about this front page piece in this morning's Washington Times with the headline, "The GOP Prayers Amendment Will Heal the Rift with the Right." It begins by saying Republican leaders in Congress will move today to heal a rift with their conservative supporters. Do you think that your amendment would do that?
Well, the purpose of the amendment is not to heal a rift with any particular group. The purpose of the amendment is for Congress to start responding to what the American people have felt since 1962, when the Supreme Court began these outlandish decisions using the First Amendment not to protect religious rights, but to restrict freedom, starting with the 62 Amendment saying that even if it was voluntary during the school day, during school hours, kids couldn't come together and pray. It was followed with the 1980 decision saying the 10 Commandments could not be put on the wall of a public school. The 1985 decision where it said even a law to permit a moment of silence was unconstitutional because it permitted silent prayer. Then there was the 1992 decision saying that a prayer offered at a school graduation was also unconstitutional. So the purpose of this amendment is to have Congress finally start addressing these Supreme Court decisions. Many of them were 5-4 decisions. Close calls with the Supreme Court. Congress has the ability to do something, but we haven't had a vote on the necessary constitutional amendment since 1971. That's the reason that this is coming up today.
This is an amendment to what?
This is an amendment to the Constitution to specify that even though we will never have an official government religion, government-established religion, nevertheless, the people's right to pray on public property, including schools, and to recognize their religious traditions, heritage, or beliefs shall not be infringed. So it has both the protection, as the First Amendment properly states it, to make sure that we don't have any official church, but it corrects how the Supreme Court has twisted and warped the First Amendment. The First Amendment is a beautiful piece of work, and what the Founding Fathers intended for it to mean is really proper. But the Supreme Court began to twist it, began to distort it, and rather than using it to protect religious freedom, they have used it to attack religion in the country. So at the same time as we have guns coming into school, knives coming into school, drugs coming into school, and yet some people say what they want to make sure that they keep out is prayer, that's just not right.
We're opening up our phone lines. Invite you to join us with Congressman Istuk this morning. He'll be with us for about 15 minutes to take your calls. There's the numbers at the bottom of your screen. 202-624-1111 if you're a liberal, 202-624-1115 if you're a conservative, and 202-737-6734 if you're a moderate. Congressman, I'm frantically looking here in the papers today because I wanted to be able to read the exact wording of it. You wouldn't happen to have the wording of your amendment with you, would you?
If someone here, it's just off camera, if they'll hand me my packet, I'll pull out a copy to make sure that I don't misquote it from, just doing it by memory.
It's in a couple papers this morning. I just thought it might be helpful. While you're doing that, let me go ahead and ask you about this. This is today's USA Today lead editorial against your amendment this morning. They write this, but far from protecting religious freedom, it could deprive religious minorities in any community of the protections written by the Founding Fathers. Further, it would open the public till to taxpayer subsidies for religious institutions.
Well, but that's incorrect on both counts. I think what some people, unfortunately, have done is to say, well, the Constitution is meant to protect me from religion. And that means that if in some sort of gathering in a public place, if even one person objects and says, well, I'm thin-skinned, I'm intolerant, I don't want to hear somebody else's prayer, then that means they are enabled to censor everybody else. That's an attack not only on religious freedom, that's an attack on free speech. Secondly, when it comes to the portion of the amendment that deals with benefits, this is not funding of religious activity. This is simply saying that faith-based groups such as drug treatment programs and so forth have the same right to participate in federal grants to help further those objectives as anything else. We already have, for example, over $1 billion a year in federal social service grants that goes to Catholic Charities USA. There's nothing new about this. What we are trying to do is to protect certain Supreme Court decisions. The Supreme Court has waffled in this area area of whether a religious organization for a secular purpose can receive federal dollars. Most recently, they have come down on the side of saying, yes, it's okay. And before they change their mind again, we simply want to lock in those decisions. That's what that's about. Let's look at the language of the Religious Freedom Amendment, and this is what the House will vote on later today. And it reads as follows: to secure the people's right to acknowledge God according to the dictates of conscience, neither the United States nor any state shall establish any official religion, but the people's right to pray and to recognize their religious beliefs, heritage, or traditions on public property, including schools, shall not be infringed. Neither the United States nor any state shall require any person to join in prayer or other religious activity, prescribe school prayers, discriminate against religion, or deny equal access to a benefit on account of religion.
Did you come up with that? Did you come up with the wording?
The wording is the combination of years of efforts by multiple people. Obviously, I'm the principal sponsor of the bill. It was amended also within the Judiciary Committee. And as you probably noticed from reading it, we've gone to pains not only to make sure that people are guaranteed that their religious rights don't stop when they step onto public property, but to also make clear when there's no official government-sanctioned religion to be established, nobody is ever compelled to join in saying a prayer or, for that matter, in any other religious activity. So we've got the safeguards, and also it says any prayer in school cannot be a government-composed prayer, nor can government insist that it must take place. The standard, I think, let me just, if I make this simple point, the standard is the same as the Supreme Court has established for the Pledge of Allegiance. The Supreme Court has ruled that no child can be compelled to say the Pledge of Allegiance, but they did not give someone who didn't want to say it the right to censor everybody else who did want to say it.
Phone calls for you, Congressman. Valparaiso, Indiana, on the conservative line. Your first up. Good morning.
Yes, I would just like to say that I think we should hold our Supreme Court justice accountable versus jumping up and wanting to amend the Constitution every time an elected official thinks that, this is going to get popular right now. When will it stop playing with the Constitution? Start holding people accountable for their actions.
We've been trying to do that since 1962 when they made this ruling. Unfortunately, the efforts to try to get the Supreme Court to change these decisions, even though, as I said, several of them were 5-4 decisions, have been unsuccessful. So are we going to go another generation without having this fixed, or are we going to use the mechanism that the Founding Fathers gave us within the Constitution to correct these things, namely through a constitutional amendment? It's the only route that's left.
Boston, you're next on the liberal line. Morning, Boston.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Morning.
I have a problem with the idea of forcing someone. I know you're saying that it's not forcing, but
that's right. Absolutely not forcing anyone.
Well, you're saying that it's okay to subject someone to have to sit there in school and listen to someone else pray.
Well, let's address that issue. Right now, the law says that kids are required to be in school. And one of the Supreme Court justices who dissented from this told people what the so-called captive audience really is. He says for children to be required to spend all day in school and not have what is normal every place else. For example, here in Congress, we open sessions with prayer. Legislatures open sessions with prayer. City council meetings open with prayer. Chamber of Commerce meetings open with prayer. So as Justice Stewart said in his dissent, to require kids to be at school and there to say they have to be isolated from what is normal within society is not neutrality toward religion. What he said it is placing religion at an artificial, state-created disadvantage. Neutrality, as he said in the dissent, consists of saying if somebody wants to be able to pray, that ought to be equally protected just as any other right of free speech.
Arlington, Virginia, you're next on the moderate line. Good morning.
Hi. I had a question for the representative. I'm curious to know how this amendment would protect the religious freedom of those citizens whose religion does not acknowledge a God with a capital G.
Well, this amendment protects everyone, whether it's minority, majority, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God, because we state clearly that it's according to the dictates of individual conscience. We state clearly that neither the United States nor any state shall ever establish any official religion. We state clearly that no person is ever compelled to participate and join in a prayer, nor ever compelled to engage in any other religious activity. That government shall not compose prayers for people, nor insist that prayers must occur. So we have plenty of safeguards in the amendment. We've tried to be sensitive to everyone, but for goodness sakes, we want to get away from the notion of saying that just because a couple of people may disagree, therefore they can stomp out the rights of the vast majority of people who believe that prayer is positive and uplifting and something that we need, not only in everyday life, but our students need to be exposed to it too.
From the conservative line, Washington, D.C.
Hi. I want to say that these kinds of bills and things that come up and that are issued all the time by the representatives just cost a lot of money. And I think that this is a push to restrain other people's religions. I'm a conservative, but at the same time, I'm both African American and Jewish, and I see the problems when you are forced to sit somewhere and observe something that you're not really a part of. The restraints that my children are forced to be in school, and for them to have to be there and sit next to Christians, they're out for Christmas, they're out for Easter. I have to take my children out for our religious holidays. I just think these whole kind of bills, I think these things should be left alone. I just hope these kinds of bills are squashed and that this won't pass.
Thanks.
Well, what you're actually arguing against, I think, is the very notion of public schools, because public schools already require your children to do all sorts of things with which you may not agree or disagree. And the point here is, are you tolerant of those other things which go on in public schools and to which your child is subjected? I might mention, you mentioned you're both African American and Jewish. One of the groups that supports this is the National Conference of Jews and Blacks. We also have the largest black denomination in the country, the National Baptist, or among the great many denominations and groups supporting it. We have other members of the Jewish faith, such as a National Jewish Organization of Rabbis called Toward Tradition. So this is not by any means an exclusively Christian effort.
This email coming in this morning for you, Congressman. Why even under today's Constitution can't I go to school and pray to myself, to my own personal God? Religion is personal. Why do I have to involve anyone else in a public display?
There are multiple types of prayer, whether you're talking about in the Bible or elsewhere. People pray singly, and they also pray in groups. It's important that people have the freedom to do it both ways. I mentioned that a number of these court decisions were 5-4 rulings. If you read, for example, the ruling where the Supreme Court said that a prayer offered at the school graduation was unconstitutional, you will find that Justices Rehnquist, Scalia, Thomas, and White said in their dissent, what the rest of the court did, that nothing brings people together. Nothing helps them develop not only a toleration, but actually an affection for people of other faiths than coming together to pray together. That is a uniting force, not a divisive force.
What's your own religious background, Congressman?
My own religious background, I was raised in Texas. I was raised as a Southern Baptist. I'm a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often called Mormon. Certainly, you know, in my lifetime, I have visited many people in other faiths, had all sorts of discussions, and I enjoy the opportunity to be around a people of different faiths and further that understanding.
Was there ever a time in which you were not allowed to pray in a public school or felt that you couldn't?
I grew up during the time when school prayer was either allowed or when the civil disobedience, which still exists today, and some people think because they haven't been sued yet that therefore they're safe from a lawsuit. There's a lot of civil disobedience with prayers in schools today, and I grew up in a time when we had prayer in public school, and even after the Supreme Court ruling, where they hadn't gotten around to suing our locality and other localities yet. So I grew up as part of this tradition. We had prayer at the start of the school day. We had prayer at my high school graduation, both at the start and at the finish of it, and people felt free to have not at Christmas time, at school programs, not only to sing something like Frosty the Snowman, but to be able to sing, "Oh, Come All You Faithful," or Silent Night. Nowadays, even the post office has taken down the banners which used to say Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. There's plenty of other examples we can cite where there's an effort, unfortunately, supposedly to comply with the Constitution, to sanitize religion from public life. And when people are concerned about what's going on in school and they say, you know, we need to be able to talk about values, nothing brings values along with it more than exposure to the devotional and positive experiences of prayer. After all, as I said before, we have too many guns and knives and metal detectors and drugs and teenage pregnancies in our public schools. And many people say, you know, it would be nice if with all those other things we were able to have a little bit of prayer too.
A couple more calls for you. New Haven, Connecticut on the Liberal line. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a lifelong, very devout Christian and a minister for some 30 years. And I want to urge Christians not to be fooled by people like Istuk and the Christian Coalition, who are simply a front for the Republican Party, trying to seduce as many Christians as possible to come over to the Republican Party. And this Istuk amendment, like his prior Istuk amendment, which was a crazy plan to limit people's expression in organizations.
No.
And a crazy idea of reforming, which was deforming public financing. This idea as well is a bad idea. It reflects the old mentality of Europe, where religion and politics were totally intertwined, and the churches influenced the government, and the government influenced religion.
Congressman?
Well, I think someone has certainly given the gentleman some sort of twisted version of what I've done. And also, if you want to talk about the origin of this, you look at the public opinion polls, and I've got a collection of dozens of public opinion polls which date back to the Supreme Court decision of 1962. You will find consistently 75 to 80% of the American people not only support school prayer, but support a constitutional amendment to make it possible to have school prayer, not compulsory, but voluntary, once again, on a freely permitted basis in our public schools. So for the gentleman to think that this is some sort of conspiracy, he needs to look at 75 to 80% of the American people who have supported this for the last 36 years.
Moderate line, Elkin, West Virginia.
Yes, I just have a couple questions. What has taken so long to get the Freedom Act back?
I think that's a good question. We have not had a vote on a school prayer amendment in the House of Representatives since 1971. And that vote happened despite the efforts of the then majority to block it. It was brought up through what they call the discharge petition process. And this has not been on the agenda of Congress, and that's why the issue has been let go since 1971, because the people that were in leadership in Congress blocked efforts to bring this up to a vote. It's only when the majority of Congress changed in 1994 that it became possible to pursue this actively with the expectation that we would, in fact, be able to get a vote, and that vote will happen today.
Congressman, as for our viewers who are watching the House of Representatives later today, give us a little idea of what they will see and when they might see it.
Okay. This bill should be brought up sometime before noon when we begin consideration. For those that know the process of the House, there will be an hour debate on the rule, there will be 2 hours of general debate, and then there will be an hour debate on an amendment that will be offered to this legislation. So obviously people will hear both sides developed. What I understand happens quite freely is there's a lot of scare tactics that different people employ on something like this, and that's really unfortunate. But I think that if, as I've mentioned before, some people want to say, oh my goodness, who would believe in such a thing? And I'll tell them, many justices of the U.S. Supreme Court have dissented and said that the court has gone in the wrong direction in this whole series of decisions. One of those is the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, William Rehnquist, who has led the dissent from what a bare, slim majority of the justices have done in many cases. And as I said before, that's where Congress has an obligation to step in. When the Supreme Court takes the Constitution that's intended to protect religious freedom and begins to use it as a weapon to suppress and silence a lot of religious expression, Congress has a duty to step in and to try to do something about it. The Constitution is meant to make sure we don't have any sort of official government-dictated faith, but a prayer is not establishing a government church. It's merely establishing an opportunity for free exercise of religion.
Congressman Ernest Istuk is a Republican of Oklahoma, elected in 1992. He represents the 5th District, which is where, Congressman?
It's principally around Oklahoma City, although it goes to other parts of the state, too.
Thanks very much for joining us this morning. We'll be checking in at beginning at 10 a.m. when the House of Representatives comes in this morning. And we're back in our studio this morning. Camille Paglia is back with us. She's going to be joining us for 45 more minutes, taking your phone calls this morning. Anything you found out in the papers during the time, or any story that you found that interested you?
Well, I find very interesting this article about a million-year-old skull. It's found near the Red Sea. And I'm very interested in science and archaeology. And again, this is a part of what I think is missing from a lot of the humanities education now in the elite schools. Television is filling the gap here. The programs of Discovery Channel and of A&E Network and so on, which talk about ancient culture. I think that we need a radical reform of education to highlight the ancient history, worldwide ancient history, and also science. And this, again, science is constantly being questioned in the postmodernist and post-structuralist ideology of the elite schools. I love this kind of intersection of ancient anthropology and to try to find little details that show that perhaps the accounts of the wanderings of the Hebrews in the Old Testament are based on fact, or who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. That kind of thing I find absolutely fascinating. And the more, I think, discussion of the Bible that there is, for me, even as a literary document, the better. As an atheist, I think that the Bible, as a collection of poetry and of parable and of instruction, is one of the greatest works of art in the world. And I think the people who study the Bible find it infinitely refreshing, even if you don't accept the actual existence of God.
Michael Kaminsky Sr. has this email for you. Ms. Paglia, what do you think of the current hysteria on smoking in this country?
I am happy to take a pro-tobacco position here. I am so sick and tired of this campaign against tobacco. People are carrying on taking this kind of, on platforms against tobacco. We have far greater ills in the world. You cannot stop people from auto-medicating themselves, from altering their psychic states. Tobacco is a far better substance for young people than the kinds of drugs that they're taking, cat tranquilizers like Special K, or they're killing themselves by taking things from under mother's kitchen sink and huffing on the spray. You can't stop that. Tobacco, in fact, concentrates the mind, refines the consciousness. The overall benefits of tobacco in the last several hundreds of years, in terms of how tobacco has helped scholarship, editorial projects in the middle of the night, helping people to think and to paint and to create and to make films and so on. This tobacco crusade is insane. Okay? It's diversion away from the real psychological and spiritual ills of this culture. And another thing, and I'm on this topic.
Are you a smoker, by the way?
Because I'm now 51 years old, okay, and so on, I try to just very moderately have the occasional cigarette or cigar. I love tobacco. I think that pure tobacco, not the kind of tobacco that's in the adulterated form with the 90 different chemicals that is manufactured with the filters and so on, I think that's bad. But pure tobacco is a Native American herb, okay, that has been used, passing the pipe and so on, has gone on in rituals on this continent for untold many centuries. But the kind of infantilization of the young, people carrying on about how many young people are starting to smoke every day, the way the kids are denied the right to drink, okay, yet they can send them to war, okay, and so on, but you can't let them drink. I think that has been awful. There's been an awful backlash. Kids, it's a lot easier for them to pop pills and take the worst kind of drugs. I think that alcohol and tobacco used in moderation are in fact civilization enhancing.
Panama City Beach, Florida, on the conservative line. Good morning.
Good morning. I would just like to commend Ms. Paglia on her individuality and her impressive independence.
Thank you.
It's so refreshing. Myself, as an objectivist, as a reader of Ayn Rand, there are some things where Ms. Paglia doesn't really agree, but she's on the right track, I think. And I would just like to commend her individuality. It's really refreshing, and she's the type of woman that I would love.
Thank you. Many people have commented on the resemblance between me and Ayn Rand, who was a very important intellectual just before I came to college in the middle of the 1960s. For people of the 1950s, a very conformist era, apparently Ayn Rand had an incredible liberating effect on people's minds. There are many areas of agreement that we have, and I think it's because we have common sources. We read the same sorts of romantic theories and in the philosophy of Nietzsche and so on. We differ on some things. For example, even though I don't go to church, I have great respect for religion. And Ayn Rand, like the great Simone de Beauvoir, the feminist French intellectual, tend to dismiss religion as part of a kind of the rudimentary phase of culture. There's a kind of rationalist bias in both Ayn Rand and Simone de Beauvoir that I don't have much patience for, I have to say, overall, because I believe that the greatest truths about life cannot fully be expressed in words. I think that intuition and what the religious people call faith is also extremely important.
Jeff Baldwin, email, says this, talking about Hillary Clinton here. He has a paragraph ahead of it. He says, no matter what Hillary Clinton says after her White House days, she will always be known as a woman who sold her soul for a man who has no soul.
Well, unfortunately, Hillary Clinton has been, forced into a kind of secondary position here. She did use a man, after all, to gain power. She did not go the ideal feminist route of seeking power on her own. On the other hand, again, I still feel that once the Clintons are gone from the White House, that Hillary will be freer to speak her mind, and that she can be a formidable speech giver. The kind of role she played, for example, at the Beijing UN conference on women's rights and so on, I think is a kind of prefiguration of the leadership role that I expect her to play. She's still a relatively young woman. I think that she will be a great force for improvement of women's law around the world.
On the liberal line, Darien, Georgia, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to comment on the Istook Amendment. As nearly as I can see, that approaches fascism. Fascism is trying to impose an individual thought on an entire society, and that's what the entire Christian right movement appears to me to be, and certainly this Istook Amendment. I'd also like to say that I think it's time that we start taxing the churches in this country. The government could raise an enormous amount of revenue, and the churches are interfering in affairs of state, whether they admit to it or not. And I think that an enormous amount of money could be raised by taxing them just like we tax corporations and individuals.
Thanks, Georgia.
We can't forget how important preachers were in progressive movements of the last 200 years. It was preachers who led the opposition to slavery in the 19th century. Martin Luther King was a preacher. Jesse Jackson is a minister, and so on. So I think that overall in history, yes, in European culture, there was a very queasy intermixture of church and state, but we don't have that here. On the contrary, I think our problems are more on the level of the spiritual vacuum that the young are experiencing. So I think that the ethical side of the culture needs to be built up a bit more.
On the op-ed page of the Los Angeles Times this morning is a piece written by two senators, Dianne Feinstein and Robert Torricelli, talking about James Hormel, who is the person who has been nominated to be the ambassador to Luxembourg, but his nomination is questioned for many reasons, but one was because he's homosexual. They write this: should a man be denied the opportunity to serve a U.S. ambassador to Luxembourg because he's gay? And he says, by blocking the nomination of Hormel, the Republican Party is in danger of becoming the party of prejudice and bigotry. They put the bipartisan commitment to Jefferson's call for equal opportunity for all and special privilege for none in jeopardy. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think high-level people who are gay should be allowed to serve everywhere in the military or in politics or in diplomacy, but I think that the questions that are being raised are legitimate ones. To what extent is this man, I don't know, he seems to be a very competent man, to what extent is he in intricate association with the worst kind of gay activism in this country? I think, again, as an open lesbian, I say, I do not want a representative of this very rigid and strident kind of gay activism, which sees bigotry everywhere. Even the language used there I find offensive. Okay, the idea that moral and ethical people who, on the basis of their religion, find homosexuality ethically abhorrent, the idea that they are bigots, okay, is one of the stupidest, okay, and most inflammatory sorts of use of language. That I think is the worst part of gay activism. So it's up to Mr. Hormel, to make it clear to what extent does his homosexuality belong to his private life, where it belongs, or to what extent is he going to be an ambassador for a coterie, a very arrogant coterie in this country that I'm very glad has lost a lot of prestige in recent years.
When did you discover your lesbianism?
Well, I mean, I've always been a very odd character. I mean, I think that I was born in the wrong era almost. That my kind of aggressive way of being a girl was simply not fashionable in the 1950s. So you can see very, very early on my desire to masquerade as at Halloween, ages 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm a Roman soldier, I'm a matador, I'm Napoleon at age 8, and not many 8-year-old girls have a Napoleon complex at that young point. I think I just just was constantly fighting against the restrictions of Doris Day America, where a girl had to be kind of obedient and quiet and seek popularity and so on. So I'm not sure, in another kind of a culture, I might have been a nun. In another culture, I might have been, I might have married. And my grandmother used to say, if you were married, your husband would either beat you or kill you, he would say, because I was like, just refused to obey. So I think that I'm just an odd character. I don't fit into, normal sexual conventions.
From the conservative line, New York City, good morning.
Good morning. I'm enjoying Ms. Paglia, but speaking of arrogance, it's just slightly off topic, to say the least. I have an op-ed from David E. Kendall, yesterday's New York Times, commenting on Ken Starr's allusion to To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And he makes certain points that there are procedural protections of the Bill of Rights afforded to a client, and that Judge Starr, in effect, has made insidious encroachments, and he bullets about 6 points, about a few of which I wish to just comment. The distortion by Mr. Kendall is to leave the illusions to the American people, who are, I guess, not slightly ignorant of the procedures that a prosecutor has under the Bill of Rights. He cites the tape conversations, the interview of the mother, the book receipts, and so forth. The real distortion and the real encroachment has been by Mr. Kendall and Mr. Clinton, where they have formulated and manufactured law out of whole cloth. The protective function of the Secret Service, the unknown, the broadening of executive privilege to include A's, attorney-client privilege for an attorney that is being paid by the public. This is a disgrace. This is shameless. And the continued character assassination of Judge Starr, a Solicitor General, is unseemly.
Thanks. Thank you, New York City.
Oh, well, a number of things to comment on there. Unfortunately, Judge Starr has played into the hands of his critics obviously the assault on his character, which has been going on for some time. I think most people in the country just reading the newspapers would have no independent view of Judge Starr, except insofar as what he puts forward. I think that, that sort of like wandering out of his house and having those impromptu sorts of press conferences in the morning, the way he just seemed to be smiling mildly at the same time that all of these traumas were occurring downtown. I think the PR game has been very much won on the Democratic side. If only Judge Starr had presented himself in a more a serious way to show the gravitas of the law, and also if only he had concentrated his energies on this very important job instead of paralyzing the nation. I don't think he should have been doing independent legal work during this period. He's left himself open. I have no reason to question Judge Starr's ethics, but he's left himself open to this kind of a charge. But I also would certainly agree that claims, for example, that the Secret Service should be beyond subpoena power. What is this, the Praetorian Guard again? I mean, since when is there a special class of person, an armed guard around the leader, okay, who is sworn to personal loyalty to that leader? As a student of ancient history, that makes me very nervous.
Auburn Hills, Michigan, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Hello, Miss Paglia and Connie. Good morning.
Morning.
Miss Paglia, I'm only calling on the moderate line because I can't figure out what liberal conservative I'm other. I have admired your work tremendously. I was a little girl. I was born in 1956, and so I grew up able to be girly and also have the advantages of being able to speak my mind and do what I want. However, as an adult, I'm finding that's not quite so easy. I wrote a novel putting forth some of the sexual competition differences between men and women, and I've had a real hard time getting it sold. I've had editors say things like, but that's a rape. And I read it and I say, well, it's kind of a rape, but those things go on. Oh, but we can't have that in the book. And, we can't have kids smoking marijuana in the book. And we can't have hockey players. That's too macho, too macho. You can't write about that. And I just like you to know that I study the classics on my own. And I wonder if you have any advice for me. I certainly would like to hear it, or if there's where you're teaching right now, so perhaps I could communicate with you. Thank you. I'll hang up.
Well, I just say in general, for people who are struggling along as writers and so on, I think I'm a good role model, because I just struggled for years without being able to get published. It was a terrible, grueling experience. Not until I was 43, finally, did I get my first book accepted.
And who published you?
Finally, Yale University Press
Yale.
took a chance on it. Okay, but this was like an enormous book by a very strange, provocative book with a lot of anti-PC ideas, and it was they really took a great risk on it. I'm very happy. Actually, it was a woman from an editor from the South. Interestingly, a Southern lady of the old school is the one who first saw that the potential value in my work. You would think it would be the opposite. You would think some sort of cutting-edge, avant-garde person would see all these things. But I would just say that anyone who has a talent, whatever that might be, in the arts, just has to continually practice that craft. You must just go on and on and on. I just worked and I worked and I worked and I never gave up. I see so many examples, including among my friends, of people who, after the rejections start coming in, the no's, lose spirit. They get demoralized, right? And what you must say is, I'm putting the craft and the development of my talent above recognition from the outside world. And if you do that, just follow your dream and follow your vision. Over time, if you work hard enough on it, you can be rewarded. I certainly am a good example of that. Finally, to be able to practice my craft of writing and get it accepted, it's like I take such a joy in that, being able to be published after being unpublished for so long.
Have you ever done any videos? She was asking how you could.
Yes, I've done quite a few videos in collaboration with other people. I've starred in videos. I did something with a famous New York drag queen named Glenda Orgasm. We sort of went around downtown New York and visited the little tour. That's quite popular. It's been shown abroad. I've done little cameos in movies like about Pat, who is the androgynous character on Saturday Night Live. Yes, and I am playing a cameo in the new movie Henry Fool, it's called. They just won the writing award at Cannes. I haven't even seen it yet. Okay, they came, so I enjoy doing that. I think I'm a great follower of Andy Warhol, who is my god from the 1960s. I believe in this kind of intermixture of culture, of video and film and in the arts and literature. I think that is the interdisciplinary mix of the 21st century.
Portland, Oregon, on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I wanted to say that Ms. Paglia is a mesmerizing individual, very highly intelligent, and just a joy to watch and listen to. The only thing I wanted to say is that I'm ultra-liberal, SDS, ex-member from University of Hawaii, and now living in Oregon and so forth. But I wanted to comment on tobacco. I really have looked at the political ramifications of that whole industry and the cancer element and so forth. And with all due respect for civil liberties, etc., and being able to do what you want to do and so forth and so on, I think that that's fine and dandy. But I hate to hear you condone it because of the health element. And that's just about all I wanted to say. Is you're brilliant. Thank you.
Well, I think my issue is that why are there so many drugs that are being pushed, okay, by the great companies and corporations like Ritalin, for example? Why are so many millions of school children on Ritalin? Now, I think that tobacco is far better for, even if it ends up in you having cancer in middle age, than Ritalin, which flattens the emotions and energy level of so many rambunctious young people in the classroom. Now, thank God Ritalin wasn't available in my period. I think my teachers would have given that to me, and I would not be writing any books right now. Okay, I would be like just getting along well with everyone else and be able to sit still in a classroom. I think that sort of thing. I don't agree with Prozac. But the thing is, I am a product of the 1960s generation when so many people were taking drugs all around me. I did not take drugs simply because that is not my particular physiology. But I think everyone has the right to do what they want, to take any psychedelic, to take any drug. But then you must accept the consequences. That's what I'm saying. Take your drug of choice, but you certainly should not be in charge of the machinery of a locomotive hurtling through space and carrying innocent passengers. So I think those people, even though I'm a libertarian, should be willing to subject themselves to a urinalysis, even on a weekly basis. So on the other hand, anyone has the right to destroy himself or herself yourself. A tobacco actually is much more helpful in advancing your mind as an intellectual, as a writer, as an artist, even as a person who's driving a bus, okay, than, let's say, Ritalin or Prozac, or those things that are the kinds of quaaludes that make you get along with everyone else, but turns you into a kind of, turns you into a lemming, it removes your individuality. I'm for individuality as a libertarian.
Robert Rowland from Providence, Rhode Island has this email. Would Ms. Paglia debate Gloria Steinem if she agreed?
Well, I don't think Gloria Steinem has many ideas left to debate. I think the time to have debated her would have been 20 years ago. Now, I was a great fan of Gloria Steinem in the beginning. I want to make that clear. I thought she was excellent when she first came on the scene in the late 60s and early 70s. I think the foundation of Ms. Magazine was a very important thing, even though Ms. Magazine exiled from its pages any dissident feminist like myself, and therefore postponed the great kind of revision of feminism that's going on in the 1990s. In fact, when I remember Time Magazine had a kind of a survey, who would be a good candidate for the first woman president? And I wrote in and I said, Gloria Steinem, when her beauty dims. So I've been bitterly disappointed with the way that Gloria Steinem allowed herself to become a kind of tool of the Northeastern elite, and the way she and the Democratic Party, the Democratic Committee and so on, they're so intertwined in what I felt was, a way that has kept feminism back and has damaged feminism. And certainly her attitude toward me when I came on the scene, comparing me to Hitler, comparing my book Sexual Personae to Mein Kampf. What are we talking about here? Okay, when you have people leading the feminist movement who have no respect for the truth.
St. Paul, Minnesota, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Paglia for her work, especially for the chapter in Sexual Personae on Rousseau and Sade. You articulated for me my dissatisfaction with Rousseau that I had had for years, and his sort of rosy view of nature with children frolicking in the daisies, and I think your juxtaposition of him with Sade is just brilliant.
Thank you.
My question, though, is about a very popular figure who I don't think you've talked about, and I see a lot of similarities between the two of you, and this is Dr. Laura Schlesinger. And you both have very vibrant personalities, and of course both are of Italian-American heritage. So I'm curious, any thoughts or observations you have about her and her popularity?
Yes, a number of people have certainly commented that I think that there's a number of us figures where there's strong talking women who suddenly emerge in the middle of the 1990s. But possibly our ancestor, though, is Ann Landers. I think Ann Landers, who I used to read in the Syracuse newspaper, okay, with her column, that kind of a voice, I think was very influential on me. She would say, wake up and smell the coffee. So I think you possibly can hear the origins of Dr. Laura's and my voice in Ann Landers. I think that we're sort of like no nonsense. It's sort of like, stop whining, get off your duff, stop blaming other people, energize yourself. And it's like very bracing, when I'm driving the car and I hear her, Dr. Laura on and she's like laughing. People call in, they're weeping on the phone, and Dr. Laura's laughing. I think that's the proper attitude. So, and that's the Italian-American attitude. So pick yourself up, okay? Get back to work and stop complaining. Just, it's an attitude toward life, which is confrontational. Life is an adventure, and so on. So I think Dr. Laura has been an enormously positive effect.
Atlanta, you're next on the Moderate Line. Good morning.
Good morning, Camille. I wanted to call and just tell you how much I appreciate your work. I just discovered you in the past few years, and it's just been a delight.
Thank you.
I look so much to all of your work. One question I had was, I wondered what your take is on all the children who are committing these horrible crimes in these high schools by coming in and taking out their frustrations on other children, so to speak, to me, where I don't know if this is what you think, but you wonder if this is, quote, the breakdown in the family, or if they're just left so much, they're so lonely. I was a latchkey kid, but I had a lot of support from my family and from my neighbors and friends, and so I think sometimes by just saying, they're home and we don't care and, nobody's paying any attention, I think that's an easy out, and I do think everybody has to be responsible.
Thanks, Atlanta.
Yes, I think, well, certainly the number one influence here, I don't think it's popular culture or violence in the popular culture, but rather there is some sort of breakdown in the family. There is obviously a lack of an adequate role model, particularly, I think, on the father side. It's up to fathers to show what is the honorable behavior for young boys. And let's not forget, it's not kids per se who are committing these acts. It really is boys with the guns. In the old days, in the period just before the Industrial Revolution, young men had a way to seek identity by just leaving home. You could go off and get on a freighter, or you go around the world on a whaling ship, or go to war. And right now, I think the culture is such that there's no room for development of an independent masculine identity. This is a terrible problem, and there are a number of new studies that are pending and about coming out on boys. The very distinguished Christina Hoff Sommers, for example, is right now writing a book about the war on boys that has been going on in feminism. We've been paying far too much attention to girls and their problems, and not enough attention to boys. How difficult it is to be a man is a very difficult thing through history, right? To make that passage from boyhood to manhood. It's always, every culture usually has these strange, dangerous sorts of rituals that that boys undergo to be taken into the world of men. But what if there is no world of men now? What is it to be a boy? It's got a very liquid thing. Where now women are advantaged in the kinds of behavior that women are good at, sitting cooperatively in an office space, sitting quietly in a classroom, and so on. Okay? When there's no room for boys to have dignity. So we've got to look back at this again. I think that boys are in crisis.
Montville, New Jersey, on the Liberal Line. Good morning.
Morning. How you doing?
Fine, thanks.
Good. Listen, I just really need to talk about this tobacco thing a little bit. I understand what you're trying to say, but to liken tobacco, to say tobacco is a mind-altering product that makes people more creative and all sorts of things like that is likening it to heroin or LSD or anything else. You know what I'm saying? I know what you're saying about tobacco, but to some degree, what went on with the tobacco industry is one of the greatest conspiracies of the 20th century, and I am not a conspiracy theorist by any means. You're talking about a group of people who knew tobacco would cause cancer, who knew nicotine was addictive, and at one point, we've got documentation now that shows they were actually spiking cigarettes with nicotine to make sure people weren't going to leave it. So, why don't we just say that it's as bad as everything else? It's not a matter of, sure, people have the choice to smoke, and people can go home and blow their brains out. That's fine. But
thanks, Colin.
Well, I do think that there is an element of personal responsibility here. My father would often said that when he was in World War II, even at that point, the soldiers called cigarettes coffin nails. Everyone has known for most of the century that the bad effects of smoking over the long run. Now the point is, I think it's quite wrong to be blaming the tobacco industry for people's individual addictions. I think it is an addictive substance. I think that I'm more concerned, rather than the doctoring of cigarettes with excess nicotine, I'm more concerned about the multiple chemicals that are in there that prevent, cigarettes, for example, from continuing to burn and cause couch fires, that sorts of things. There's all kinds of poisons in the tobacco smoke that aren't related to tobacco. So I hope that you can see that I'm taking a pro-tobacco position. I have not taken a pro-tobacco industry position necessarily. But again, as a libertarian, I feel that all these things have to be left in individual hands. And I still believe that it is better for young people to be smoking than it is for them to be taking the drugs that they are taking. You cannot believe the drugs they are taking. Marijuana, over the long term, I believe that marijuana should be legalized, by the way, and that it should be controlled the way alcohol and tobacco are. I don't take it. By the other hand, I see very pernicious effects on the reasoning powers of the brain over long term from marijuana, not from tobacco. Tobacco enhances, marijuana dulls. Marijuana does help, I think, jazz performance and jazz composition. And there's certain areas of arts creativity that I think marijuana helps, but not when it comes to reading and writing and memory retention. So again, I think tobacco overall has been a positive influence on culture.
15 minutes left with Camille Paglia. And if you have any other stories that you have not had a chance to bring up this morning, we certainly can do that. And we'll take a couple more calls. What's the one you want to talk about?
This photograph.
This one?
Yeah.
A photograph, okay. Why do you want to talk about the photograph?
Well, Monica Lewinsky with yet another group of middle-aged men. I just find this a bit tiresome. Monica Lewinsky floating with that sort of Mona Lisa smile around with these older men. I think that feminism has really been set back by this kind of image of a young girl. There was an attempt early on to portray Monica Lewinsky as someone who entered in. She's can think for herself. She's old enough. She has a consensual relationship with her employer, and this vision of her the past few months, always with either the father figure or the paternalistic lawyer, sitting in restaurants, quietly smiling. I'm thinking, good God, what is this? She's like a geisha. She's like a geisha being dragged around. And there she is once again, okay, with the men, always with the men. Now, she's perfectly capable of making decisions on her own. She didn't have to be this prisoner, this odalisque that she has been the past few months. She could have got off on her own and gotten her own privacy. I just think this is, it's been a disaster. Well, it's going to take a while for us to work out what exactly were the dynamics of choice or coercion in her particular adventures of the past few years.
Marietta, Georgia, on the conservative line. You're next. Good morning.
Oh, yes, I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
I'm nervous. I'm a conservative, and I'm a member of the Christian Right, and I just want to say that this is the best program I've ever seen on C-SPAN. I've really enjoyed listening to Camille, and I have two questions. Why do you think so many conservatives agree with your point of view? And what do you think about Clinton going to China with all of their human rights abuses?
Oh, well, secondly, I'm very troubled by the administration's attitude toward China and for heaven's sakes, we've destabilized all of Asia, okay, by causing this arms race now with nuclear tests going off in India and in Pakistan. The Clinton administration has been strongest, of course, in domestic issues, and it's ignoring of the foreign policy stage. It could lead us to the brink of World War III. I'm very concerned. I don't think, obviously, that our president should be going to Tiananmen Square for the atrocity that occurred there during the great period, the democratic uprising there, that was so brutally squashed. But then the other question was,
why do you think so many conservatives agree with you?
Oh yes, okay. Well, I believe I'm simply a voice of common sense. I don't think that the conservatives agree with me on some issues, but they certainly don't on others. For example, I have taken a radically pro-prostitution position. For example, I favor the legalization of prostitution. Why? I think that, again, as a libertarian, the government has absolutely no right to intervene in private behavior. I respect prostitutes as sex workers. I think that if feminism was worth its salt, it would have acted to help to unionize prostitutes and to help protect also the rights of strippers. I favor the strip clubs. So the whole areas of my thinking where conservatives are uncomfortable. I think that I'm just one of those figures of the 1990s. There are a number of us, okay, who have tried to look again at the polarization of the political landscape, this liberal versus conservative kind of dichotomy, which dates all the way back in certain ways to the period just after the French Revolution. I think that no longer can it's not longer adequate for the new global stage of politics of the 21st century.
Clarksburg, West Virginia, on the moderate line. Good morning.
Good morning. Miss Polly, I've got to say you are wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Before I make the comment that I've had, which I've been trying to get through for about half an hour with, but it's worth it. Your stance on tobacco is spectacular. It's wonderful, and I can just imagine Henry Waxman somewhere just having a little hissy fit, over your actually taking a sensible position on this. The question I had, there was an article in Vanity Fair recently. It was by a feminist, and it was about, speaking of the Northeastern elite establishment, it was about a gathering of a luncheon of some kind in New York City with Erica Young, and there were, a couple other authors, and they were just giddy, talking and speculating about the president and Monica Lewinsky and what may have happened, and it was just so ridiculous. But I was curious if you've seen that article and if you had any comment on it.
Well, actually, that Marjorie Williams, it was actually a superb general article, one of the best I have ever seen, and I left a call to her to compliment her. I thought it was a brilliant article. People should see it. Marjorie Williams' account of, from the liberal feminist point of view, of the disastrous failings of the feminist leadership in being able to judge these various cases of sexual harassment. For example, even though I favor sexual harassment guidelines moderately applied, I did not agree with the canonization of Anita Hill. I felt that was a fascist exercise to bring a man into public ridicule in the way that Clarence Thomas was, to ask him to recount lunchtime conversations from 10 years before. I do not believe Anita Hill was sexually harassed. That is just not a verbal, discussions or bantering conversation is to me not sexual harassment. Okay, I think that was a kind of perversion of it. Then, when Paula Jones came on the scene, I was the only leading feminist